So before we begin, I'd like to quickly introduce the audience who is watching this interview to Audrey and some of her work. So Audrey is a young Asian activist who started her tech journey when she was 15 years old as a student in the Philippines. She's the founder of Women in Technology, an organization that empowers Filipino youth to create their own solutions for the future. Audrey's goal is to make tech education accessible to youth across the world so that they can innovate regardless of their gender or socioeconomic background. Her organization now hosts many programs to teach programming skills, as well as immerse students and educators in the research and achievements of Filipino women within the field of technology. And Audrey is the winner of the e-leader category of the Dear Asian Changemaker Awards. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so to give our audience a little bit of context, Audrey, could you tell us a little more about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Audrey. As mentioned, I'm the founder of WiTech, which is short for Women in Technology. We are a global youth-led organization that aims to educate, inspire, and empower youth to break gender barriers and use tech to make a difference in society. So what does this mean? We hosted the first Women in Tech conference for students and by students in the Philippines. This was largely inspired by seeing like the Grace Hopper Women in Tech conference in the United States and wanting really something like that to happen in the Philippines. And when we couldn't find a conference like that, we decided to start one ourselves, and we partnered with Accenture Philippines and got a really exciting turnout of predominantly female high school students, college students who wanted to break into tech. After that, we noticed that a large amount of the audience that was able to access that conference came from middle to upper class backgrounds, so that they could travel in person to kind of this tech hub area of the Philippines where a lot of like the opportunities were. And we wanted to make sure that tech was accessible to everybody, regardless of their socioeconomic status. So we started a Women in Tech Teach program in which we would go to different under-resourced public schools across the Philippines, and we teach really basic computer literacy and not just like introductory coding by scratch, although we had that. We also did things like how to use a laptop, how to use Microsoft Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, because for a lot of Filipino students, that isn't part of the national curriculum. And we really acknowledge at WiTech that computer literacy or access to just computers and in general is a right when currently it is a privilege. So that's a bit more on WiTech. On the personal side, I am currently a senior at Stanford, majoring in science, tech, and society with a double minor in English and education. STS is an interdisciplinary major, which means I can basically choose from a very large menu of classes across departments like anthropology, sociology, data science, and CS. And I get to culminate it into basically a very broad range of topics. So I focus in innovations and organizations. That's my track. And it basically means like understanding startups and businesses and thinking about how to make them more ethical and diverse.
Oh, that's super awesome to hear. Like, I remember myself, I've been involved in it with a couple of like girls coding contests and like different coding workshop initiatives before. So it's super cool to see that you're doing this really important work with not just coding and like programming, but also with computer literacy, because that's something super relevant with what we do right now. So several years ago, when you founded Women in Technology to address the gender gap in tech-related sectors, were there any particular people or experiences that inspire you to launch the initiative?
Mhm. Definitely. Looking back all the way to back when I was 15, which was, wow, 7 years ago. That's crazy. So I think what really inspired me was going online and looking at the stories of other founders of nonprofits that were around my age, so around like the teen years. And I remember like in that search to look for other people that were starting things at such a young age, I was very frustrated to find very little like Filipinos. I think now in 2023, there are much more Filipinos that have started their own nonprofits at a young age. But back when I was 15, that wasn't the case. So I went online and I remember finding this site called the We Are Family Foundation's Global Teen Leaders Program. And for those that aren't familiar, We Are Family Foundation was started by the musician Nile Rodgers, and he wanted to be able to create programs and resources and a leadership conference essentially for youth that have started initiatives, for profit or nonprofit, all geared towards social good and different problems around the world. So I remember reading those profiles and being really inspired because people my age and like younger than me were starting different organizations geared towards, say, like racial literacy, or like someone's doing research on like cancer solutions, things like that. Just a very broad range of solutions geared towards making a positive impact in society. And for me, that was really an exciting experience to know that like I wasn't the only one at that age like working towards creating something. And it became a really full circle moment because I believe like 2 or 3 years after I started WiTech, I applied for that Global Teen Leaders Conference, and I got in, and I was able to tell the organizers that their work in curating like this list of young leaders like really inspired me during moments where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, like I know nobody else my age doing this. And I remember it just very vividly being very inspiring for me, just knowing that out there, and through the power of the internet, I was able to connect with other global team leaders actually before I got the award as well, and was able to ask them questions about like how do you handle like organizational management, how do you like structure things. And I think just having that network accessible to me even like before I became a part of their program officially was very, very beneficial.
Wow, that's really inspiring actually. Who knew, right? Like from a little like website you went and discover, and then now you found actually your passion. So that's really awesome, Audrey. So I guess I have like following up as the next question. So, Women in Technology has launched many initiatives such as WiTCon, WiTech, WiTalks, WiTech, roadshows, and etc. So, what positive impacts has this had on the STEM education of these young WIT initiative participants? Yeah, could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think in the 7 years that WiTech has been around, we've been able to impact very different facets of the tech scene in the Philippines and beyond. So locally, we were able to expose many, many, not just women actually, but men as well that wanted to go into technology. So the issue in the Philippines is that it's not necessarily just a matter of like educating and getting like more girls into computer science or tech fields broadly. Like there's a very big socioeconomic barrier, as I mentioned earlier, that prevents like a lot of like low income men as well from like going into such fields. So when we opened up our Women in Tech conference and events to everyone, we saw largely a turnout of women, but also men as well that wanted to break into tech and lacked the resources to do so. And that also goes for our Women in Tech Teach programs, wherein we just went to these public schools and we taught anybody that wanted to participate basic computer literacy. And in our time, we've taught over 200 public school students basic computer literacy skills across the Philippines. And we've also opened up chapters across the world. And that was really born out of this idea that people were DMing me on Instagram, actually being like, oh, do you have a WiTech in Malaysia? Do you have a WiTech in Singapore? And I remember being like, this is so cool that there's a demand for it. But I, as somebody that's based in Manila and going to university in the United States, didn't have the capacity to expand into those areas. And so I talked to my team and we decided to launch a chapter program in which people that expressed interest to bring WiTech events to their home countries, home cities, could do so. And that idea was really that we wouldn't dictate, oh, you should start a Women in Tech conference, do we teach programs? It was more like, what do you need for your community? Is it more like a conference demand? Is it a tech literacy workshop demand? Like, let us help you and give you our existing resources so you don't have to start from scratch. And that meant giving out the computer literacy modules that we used across the Philippines and like translating that into the language of the city or the province that we were trying to implement it in. That meant connecting different chapters to speakers if they needed speakers. So say they wanted to have a workshop done by like a woman in user experience design, but they didn't know anyone, I would link them up to somebody that I knew that could Zoom in or go in person. So that was a really exciting, I think, effect of our impact, being able to expand to over 20 chapters and just see places like Ukraine, for instance, different parts of the US, different parts of Asia, start these initiatives. I think one of the really crazy moments that it hit me that our chapters are really thriving and doing so well was when I got a yearly recap. I get a yearly recap from one of our chapters, WiTech Batangas, which is a province here in the Philippines. And as part of that recap, I found out that their leadership team was able to meet Kamala Harris when she visited the Philippines because they invited like different gender equality initiatives to come speak with her. And that was a really crazy moment because I think while we supplied like the initial like connections and framework and like resources. Like they did all of that on their own, like getting all these grants and starting all these WeTeach programs around Batangas and beyond. So that was really crazy. And I think on like a day-to-day basis as well, like I feel the impact of what we've done. Like I'm home here in Manila because most of the time I'm at Stanford for school, and I was like at the bookstore near where I live about a week ago, and somebody from in high school where a lot of our members of WiTech come from, WiTech Manila come from, came up to me and he was like, oh, like I'm really inspired by what you do at WiTech and I'm hoping to apply and be part of your team. So it's just really lovely getting feedback like that. And it really, I think, keeps the team going and keeps me going personally.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear about all these incredible impacts that you've had, especially with like what you've done to make your initiative kind of like accessible across so many different countries and places and people. So it's super cool that you've been able to do that, and like getting to meet Kamala Harris, like having one of the chapters meet that. That's very incredible. So I think one of the other questions we had is, what other concerns do you want to address regarding what women might face in STEM fields? And could you connect this possibly to any upcoming initiatives you plan to work on to address these concerns?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a really good question because it kind of taps into what I have been doing since stepping down as executive director. So for context, in my junior year of university, I decided that it was time to let go of the reins and appoint someone else to take over. And I think a really wonderful thing about the WiTech community that we've built in the past 7 years has been that there's so many people that want to step up and lead. And Natasha Valuri, one of the chapter coordinators who handled the chapters in Asia, previously is now the executive director, and she's doing so many excellent things with handling, coordinating efforts and connecting different chapters along to collab with each other. So that was really exciting. And it really gave me the opportunity to explore my interests in tech outside of like the nonprofit grassroots kind of scene. And to me, I was talking to my roommate junior year about that, like what's my next like move going to be in tech, and I was thinking about the things I really care about still, which is like getting more women into tech. And when I dissected that thought with her, we thought about how very like one way to tackle it is the grassroots scene, which I've been doing, but also like to go into like the private sector. And what interested me the most about that sector was the venture capital scene and how like little female representation there is in terms of VCs. So I remember reading the statistic, don't quote me on this, but something about like, I think 8 to 9%, just like a very small percent of partners at VC firms being women. And when we think about how much it matters, it's easy. I think a good way to think about it is like this: like VCs are the people that provide these companies early stage, late stage with funding to, especially at early stage, to start their operations. And if we have a lack of diversity in who controls who gets what funding, I think a lot of really great startups tend to slip between the cracks. So one thing I'm very passionate about right now is getting more female representation in the venture capital scene. And I've done that by doing an internship at Cybernite Capital over this past summer. I was the only woman in the whole firm. I mean, the firm was like 5 people, but still, I was the only woman. And I remember just like talking to people about this experience, and a lot of other female interns in venture that I connected with online were saying that, yeah, the disparity is still very large. So one thing that I would like to do in the future, and one thing I'm still trying to figure out about how to do, is potentially like work in venture and maybe try to give more attention to female-led startups, perhaps startups that are working in the women's health space, for instance, or just thinking about ways that we can increase more funding for like female founded companies. So that's kind of like the next facet of women in tech that I'm very excited about.
Wow, that's so awesome, Audrey. Like, I mean, you gave us like a sneak peek of like your future projects. Oh, okay. So I guess I do have like the next question for you. During the COVID-19 pandemic, companies and schools around the world have shifted like the way they work to rely more heavily on technology, like you mentioned. So as a result, did this pandemic actually influence your initiatives and activism in any way?
Mm-hmm. The pandemic has definitely shaped a lot of our core philosophy at WiTech, which is that, as I mentioned earlier, like tech is currently a privilege when it should be a right. And this inequality really came to light, especially when classes in the Philippines were being shifted online. And a lot of students didn't have the resources to properly engage with online classes. Like they didn't have a laptop at home or Wi-Fi connection. So we decided to do a couple of fundraisers and be able to raise money for tablets for students from low-income backgrounds to engage with like online content and classes. There's a lot of articles on this around the Philippines specifically, but there have been numerous instances where students would have to like climb mountains to get better signal to send like their projects, or like some students were like doing like quizzes via text message because they didn't have Wi-Fi at home. And I think that like COVID was able to shed light on these really big issues of inequality in terms of tech accessibility in the Philippines that were there way before the pandemic. And I think that one thing at WiTech that reaffirms for us is just this desire to help bridge that inequality, not just from like a gender perspective, but from a socioeconomic status perspective as well. And being in the US as well, I've really gained more clarity on how I think the divide is very different in like Southeast Asia compared to like the United States. That's not to say that like one is like better or worse than the other. I just think it's like very different in the sense that like when I'm in Palo Alto, like I see a lot of people with that basic like connectivity access, but maybe not like the best like mentors or like role models in technology because it's still like predominantly like male space, even in like Silicon Valley. Whereas back home in Manila, I think the starting point, the root of it is really like getting that Wi-Fi access, making sure schools have like laptops to teach students how to use them, that sort of thing. So I think the pandemic really reaffirmed that for us in a lot of our chapters, focusing on tech accessibility. And as a whole, I think that one of the most rewarding things about working on WiTech is just realizing that so much of the organizing that we do is really just like based on this basic premise that we have laptops and we have Wi-Fi connection and we're able to organize as a team without being there in person. And I think by giving like those basic tech literacy skills, by giving that basic connectivity to students, maybe one day we can let them or we can help them create something of their own as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the pandemic definitely had a huge impact on like the way students learned, especially because suddenly we had so many classes moving on to Zoom. So it's great that your initiative was able to help with some accessibility in terms of that, like providing these workshops and helping with digital literacy in the Philippines. So it's really great to hear that. The next question that we have is a little bit more about your personal experience. So from your own experience, what was it like being a woman in technology in the Philippines?
Ooh, being a woman in technology in the Philippines. Okay, we'll have to like go back a couple of years because now I'm in like college in the US. I grew up in a school that had a local Philippine curriculum, meaning that there was a computer class, but the computer class was more so like how to use Microsoft Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc. And I think I never really made technology a key point of like what I wanted to be or a key part of what I wanted to work in when I grew up until my teacher decided to go off the curriculum, my computer teacher, and introduced us to this game where a snake navigated a maze using blocks that represented lines of code. And they were teaching us like for loops and things like that. And it was like really basic coding, but I remember just being really taken by it and really interested. So I asked my teacher, oh, would it be like learning more about like this coding concept in like class? And she said that it's not part of the curriculum, but if I went online, I could find resources there. So I did. I went on Codecademy, code.org, and found really, really exciting and like free resources. I watched like Harvard's introductory CS lectures because those are up on YouTube for free. And I remember being very excited about tech and telling people that I was excited about tech. And in my grade at the time, I think I was like in 9th grade, no other girl wanted to go into tech. And the only other girl that wanted to go into STEM wanted to be a doctor. So like very different from what I wanted to do. So even though I felt like the resources were there for me to take online, I felt like very much in person, I lacked the community. And I think that was really the crux of what started WiTech, just like this desire for me to like find role models and community in a space where whenever I looked at the news, I saw like a middle-aged like white guy talking about tech. And I thought like I want to find role models, I want to find community. And because I didn't see any directly accessible to me, I saw a lot of it like based in the US, for instance. I thought like, what are ways in which I can create that myself? So the blog really started with the dual intent of exposing the different stories of women in tech that I reached out to via LinkedIn, interviewing them. But it was also just like a personal attempt to like network with more women in tech and like have them like answer my questions and help like guide me into this like broad and mysterious field. So I think overall, like the WiTech blog then transformed into an organization when we really saw the demand for like in-person like events, when people would be like, oh, like I wish I could go to Grace Hopper, that looks so exciting, but like I can't fly all the way to the US. And the more that the blog grew, the more that I saw that there were female technologists, but their stories weren't being featured as much as the men. So that's why we decided to highlight them via the blog and give them speaking opportunities through the Women in Tech conferences. And then from there, I think everything pretty much just like took off and transformed into the Women in Tech Teach programs and the organization that you see today.
Thanks, Audrey. That's so awesome. Like, thanks for sharing so much of your experiences. Okay, so now to follow up, so I have another question. So like as a founder, I'm sure you have like experienced numerous roadblocks along the way. So could you talk about any significant problems that you may have come up with along your journey with WIT? And also, how were you able to get past them?
This is a really good question. I think specifically because if I remember correctly, like a lot of high school students will be listening to this. So one of the biggest roadblocks for me was time management during high school. WiTech was really picking up in terms of our events and our operations. I was getting invited to a lot of conferences and speaking engagements around like my junior year. And like junior year in the Philippines, and I'm sure like in the US is like notorious for being like the most stressful time because like you're about to apply to college the next year and you're working out like where you want to go and like how to prepare for like standardized tests and everything. So I felt like I was juggling like a million things at once, and I was always so stressed and barely getting any sleep. I think what really kept me sane during those times was thinking about one activity as a break from the other. So I saw like doing WiTech work as a break from academics, and I saw academics as a break from doing WiTech work. And now that I'm in university, I feel like I've never been as stressed as I was in high school because I got really, I think, good at juggling like a million things at once. And I think another thing that also helped me get through those periods was just having a really good support system and really good ways in which I practice self-care. So support system in the sense that because of like the Global Teen Leader Conference, for instance, I was able to meet other people running organizations, companies, and I was able to talk to them about what I was going through and felt a lot of like kinship from being able to say and hear that other people were having similar experiences to me, despite being like in other countries and other like continents around the world. I remember for self-care, I used to go and play like tennis, I used to do yoga and just like do things that were completely separate from work altogether. I think that was really helpful. And overall, I think, and this is something I'm still trying to get better at over time, I learned how to say no to things that were not something I should prioritize. So I remember having like this mentality when WiTech just started. I had to like say yes to like every invitation, every speaking engagement, like every opportunity to get the word out about WiTech. And I learned over time that that was like unsustainable, quite simply, and that I only had like 24 hours in a day to be like a whole human. And then so over time we developed a system where if I couldn't make it or if I felt like this speaking engagement could be better done by like someone else in the team, we did that. We sent other people to conferences. We made sure that like as executive director, I wasn't like the only one carrying like this weight. Like it was very like the work was very distributed throughout the team. And I think that was what really helped. And I think that's a very important lesson in like organizational management, like getting really good at delegating time management and also like knowing when it's a good time to like up team morale by doing like fun activities. One thing that the WiTech Manila president previously, Jera, would do is she'd host like these virtual PowerPoint nights with the team. So over COVID, people would just like jump on the Zoom and like present and talk about things that they love, like related or completely unrelated to tech. Like people talked about books and K-pop. And I think that was a really good way to unwind and have really good team morale, because at the end of the day, like it's easier to work with people that you consider your friends or that you consider like yourself to be friendly with. So I think those are some ways that like got me through like really chaotic times of tech.
Yeah, those are great tips. Definitely time management is super important. Like we do have a lot of audience members who are in high school or like in college, and during those busy academic times, it's also really important to delegate too when you're in an organization. So those are really great tips. We love to hear that. I think the next question we had is what resources would you recommend for young girls who are interested in technology but aren't sure how to get started or feel nervous about getting involved in tech?
I love this question because I can point to tried and tested resources that I once explored before even starting WiTech. So when I was exploring the internet for CS tutorials, I found that what I loved playing around with was code.org. And code.org is basically this free website in which you can sign up and play all these mini games that teach you coding concepts. So I remember I don't know if it's still there. This was like way back, like 7 years ago. It was like a game where Anna and Elsa from Frozen can create these like snowflakes, and then you have to like tell them where to skate to create the snowflakes, and that like represents different blocks of like lines of code. And there's like a Star Wars game. There was like another one with like a cute dog, I think, running around the screen. So just like really fun gamified websites like that, I think are a good, very unintimidating start into coding. And once you want to progress from that, I think Codecademy is a really good resource as well. That's more like actually like typing in the lines of code, and it's much less like gamified compared to code.org. But also like a really good start. You can learn HTML, Java, JavaScript. There's so many resources there. I bet there's like more coding languages since I last checked. But those are really exciting programs to try out, all for free again. And if you're more like a lecture type person, I mentioned earlier the Harvard computer science tutorials are there. I think Stanford's introductory computer science class, CS 106A, should be available on either edX or Coursera for free. I'm not so sure. And if I'm not mistaken, like you can actually do the quizzes and have them like graded, I think, by teaching assistants at the university. So those are some quick ways to start. I think in terms of the technical aspect, in terms of the community aspect, what I really love about this era of like post-COVID is that you can see so many online webinars still, but also like in-person events. So if you're more like a webinar person, you are a bit intimidated by like going in person to an event, definitely like hop on those webinars and like speaking engagements via like Zoom. One thing that I really enjoyed about being able to go to in-person events though was being able to like start conversations with the other participants, not just like the speakers. And I thought that was really valuable, and that's how we actually recruited most of our initial team at WiTech. Like I just like go up to like other girls at like that conferences and hackathons and be like, hey, like let's be friends. And that was like a really valuable experience. But at the same time, if you're just starting out in tech and you find that a bit scary or intimidating, which is like totally fine, just like hop on a Zoom and maybe like ask some questions to the speaker, or DM other participants and be like, hi, like I'm introducing myself and just talking about like why you want to go into tech or what makes you interested about it. So there's so many different resources, and I could like go on and on about it. So if anyone wants to talk more, feel free to email me or DM me.
Great, that's so awesome, Audrey. Also, if you don't mind, could you please send us like the resources that you have mentioned earlier, so we could actually link up for our audience who are watching right now the recording. So
Yeah, of course. I'm
yeah,
gonna put a note on my planner to do that.
great. Thanks so much. So my next question I have for you is, what's a day in your life like when you're doing WIT work?
Mhm. Ooh, okay. So a day in my life before I stepped down as executive director looks very different from now as something like a founder, board member. But back in the day, so pre-junior year of college, I would typically like wake up and first thing I check my emails, make sure that different like, because I get a lot of cold emails as well from like organizations or companies that want to like work with us. So I'll make sure to like forward that to the appropriate department, whether it's like a chapter in Manila or a chapter in like Singapore, depending on like who's a better fit. I communicate a lot with our chapter coordinators. So those are the people that are overseeing the different chapters around the world. We have someone handles North America, Asia, Philippine specific chapters. So I will have check-ins with them typically and talk to them about the different concerns of each chapter. And that's typically like a weekly meeting. And then typically in a day, I will also go to class. So as a college student, I have like about, I want to say 2 to 3 hours worth of class in a day, depending on how heavy a quarter is, it depends. You can take anything between like 12 minimum to like 20 max units in a quarter. So typically like 2 to 3 hours of class. And then I sprinkle throughout the day will have calls, whether it's like partnership calls, speaking engagements, media stuff. And I also like to make sure that I have time to work out. So I've gone really into running. I like going to the gym. Stanford has a really wonderful gym. So that's been a really like good way to practice self-care and just like release stress. And then one thing that I really love about a day in my life at college is that everything is so spontaneous, and that I can have like a coffee in my dorm room, and like my roommate and I can like end up like having a coffee at the same time, and it will last like an hour and a half because we'll just like keep chatting and catching up. I also love how in college at Stanford, at least specifically, like 96% of undergrads live on campus. So you can like go to the dining hall with a friend and like bump into other friends. You can like walk around campus and like see your friend like walking like their dorm RF resident follows like dog. There's a lot of like really cute moments, I think, that I'm going to miss once I graduate. And of course, like after that, I will do like homework, and I will do my skincare routine. I have a very, very detailed skincare routine, which I'm also happy to talk about if anyone wants to know. And yeah, I think every day is different. One thing that I really love about just like living on campus is just the ability to like pop into like my roommate's room because we're in a suite, and then just knock on her door and be like, hey, like, what's up? How you doing? Or it's like having friends over and having dinner parties. I think that that is such a valuable experience, and just like learning from everyone, because I think that my friends and I all take very different classes and we're focusing on different projects. So that's always fun.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear that like the college experience has been so positive for you. Like it sounds really fun that you're able to work on this initiative that really matters to you while also taking interesting classes and connecting with friends and doing self-care throughout the day. So that's definitely sounds like a really great schedule to have. And yeah, that was super cool to hear. I know that a little bit earlier you mentioned like a bit of the venture capital projects you've been working on, but are there any other current or recent projects that you're actively working on at the moment?
Mhm. Ooh, good question. So besides working on like VC and trying to explore opportunities on how to break into VC, I've also been very, very interested in like two facets of like the startup scene, the ed tech facet and the consumer facet. So right now I'm thinking about what I want to do post grad, whether it's like going to VC directly or work at a startup. And I think like those two kinds of startups, ed tech and consumer, interest me the most. Throughout working at WiTech, I think that education is such a core focus of what we do. And when I got to Stanford, I saw that there's an education school and that they offer like a minor. And I took a couple of classes. I took like an edtech speaker series where alumni came and talked about their edtech startups, and we were able to ask them questions. I took this other class about mission and money in education, which like broke down like budgeting and how like endowments work and things like that. And I love the education department, and I found that some of the kindest people I've met at university are those studying education. Because I think there's a component of like selflessness that comes with it, with like wanting to like teach other people, help like create like better literacy programs and such. So I really enjoyed that, and I'm very keen on exploring that further. I have been talking to a bunch of different people as well, like that want to start their own edtech startups, people that are working at edtech investment firms. So that's like a potential area that I want to explore. Because I also think that by working as a woman in VC, I think a lot can be done as well in like the edtech sector, and making sure that like there's certain startups, certain founders, female and also from other like underrepresented backgrounds. Because right now, most founders, as we know, are stereotypically male, stereotypically white. And so I want to help like diversify the funding, not just in terms of like gender, but also in terms of race and like who gets that kind of funding. So that's one thing I'm interested in. On the flip side, I'm also interested in the consumer investment space. So I've been thinking a lot about like beauty, women's health, thinking about like consumer social as well, and like the different ways in which like we build like brands and like product identities. I'm kind of keen on thinking about the ways as well in which we can like increase investment in like female founded like beauty companies. I think historically speaking, a lot of beauty companies, a lot of beauty like investment decisions have been run by men. And I think that in a space that is so predominantly female, we should have more like investment leadership come from like the women themselves. So I'm very excited about potentially exploring that. And overall, just really looking forward to exploring what post-grad life has to offer. I think if you asked me 2 or 3 months ago how I felt about that, I would have been a bit more like, like that's so scary, like I'm graduating. But I think that the more that I talk to alumni and other like fresh graduates about what it's like out there, the more excited I get because of how many different like possibilities come, especially from like a degree as wide as science, technology, and society. Like I could go into the more like technical space. I could go into like the startup space. I could also go into like the investment space. I think the opportunities are endless, and I feel that, and I'm very excited and grateful.
That's so awesome, Audrey. I just like hope everything goes well for your postgrad studies, and also we're also looking forward to all like the projects that you have mentioned earlier that you wish to explore in the future. So yeah, we'll be sure to keep an eye on that, and if we could, then maybe we could collaborate with Pe again. And also I have one like final question before we end our interview. Do you have any like words of wisdom or advice that you would like to give to young girls out there who aspire to pursue a career in STEM in the future?
My advice to young girls out there that want to pursue careers in STEM in the future would be to remember that there's so many resources out there for you to access. Resources in terms of learning tech skills, but also in terms of community. Besides WiTech, depending on where you're living, there are really cool programs like Code with Costi, for instance, or Girls Who Code if you're based in the US. And I have friends and friends' siblings as well that have done like those in-person like camps and really enjoyed them. I think that across like different countries internationally, like besides WiTech, there's so many different like community groups. And if anyone like has trouble like finding them, feel free to contact me, DM me, email me, and I'm happy to connect you with the different people I know that are doing gender equality and tech initiatives there. I think for young girls, it's also very important to know that when you go into a space, you're not like binded to stick with it for like the rest of your life. I think that's one thing that I've learned as somebody that is now more interested in like the VC investing space rather than like software engineering, which I once thought that I would go into. I think I read this book by Reshma Saujani, the CEO of Girls Who Code, and she said that like girls are raised to be perfectionists, but guys are raised to make mistakes and have more like trial and error. I'm paraphrasing there, but I think that really resonates with the advice I'm trying to give, which is that it's okay to explore fields and realize that like you want to pivot or do a variation of it, and like going into a field isn't like say like a 5-10 year commitment. And I think just like letting go of that perfectionist mindset, which I myself am trying to get better at every day, is really important. Because as somebody that underwent like the college application system, that it underwent like internship recruiting at college, like there's no like one perfect path. And I think the most important thing is to remember that I think life is full of variations, and it's what we make of the different paths that we choose that counts.
Yeah, that's a wonderful piece of advice because I feel like, yeah, like a lot of what happens with STEM is sometimes people feel a little nervous going in because you feel like you have to commit to it. But kind of getting over that perfectionism is an important step to having a little more freedom in exploring technology and the different sectors associated with it. So, yeah, I think that's all the questions we have for you today. So, thank you so much for taking the time to have an interview and share your work with us. It was really lovely meeting you, Audrey. And if anyone is interested in learning more about Audrey's wonderful work, you can head over to her organization's Instagram at WiTech.org or look at their website for more information. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything we had for today.